Hello, my name is Brianna Castro, and today I'll be sharing with you my virtual library. So we're going to scroll down here to the genres. I'm going to quickly scroll through so you guys can see what I read. For contemporary realistic fiction, I read Holes, Bridge to Terabithia, and The Outsiders. For fantasy, I read Ella Enchanted, The Hobbit, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. For historical fiction, I read The Witch of Blackbird Pond, Ranger in Time, and Little House in the Big Woods. For an informational biography, I read The Secret Life of Marilyn Monroe, Anne Frank the Biography, and Mary Queen of Scots. For literature representing diverse populations, I read The Help, In the Time of the Butterflies, and The Name Jar. For poetry, I read A Light in the Attic, Stampede, and Dare to Dream, Change the World. For science fiction, I read Franny K. Stein, Mad Scientist, Lunch Walks About Us, The City of Ember, and Aliens for Breakfast. And for traditional literature slash folktales, I read Adelita, The Goat Faced Girl, and The Hundred Dresses. Okay, so starting with contemporary realistic fiction, my favorite out of these three was Bridge to Terabithia. I had seen the movie quite a long time ago and I'd never read the book, and I just fell in love with it all over again. I love how Jess and Leslie are both kind of outsiders. They're not really accepted, and within like their schools, or I guess Jess with his like family life. Um, but I love how they're able to like escape and create an imaginative world where they can just be themselves and go on adventures. And even though like the ending always gets me and it's sad, it's still one of my like favorite books probably out of this whole project. Now moving on to fantasy, I think out of all three of these, my favorite was The Hobbit. I had been read this series before by my teacher, and she didn't read the first one. I'm not really sure why, but she didn't. And so getting the chance to like read this for myself, it was kind of fun to like, get to see and understand like what happened before the Fellowship of the Ring. So that was probably my favorite out of those three. Moving on to historical fiction, I think that my favorite out of these ones was Ranger in Time, Rescue on the Oregon Trail. I think that this one was my favorite, just because it was kind of a fun way to look at this part of history, and I liked how it was from like a dog going back in time to help this family as they travel on the Oregon Trail and keep them safe. I have four dogs myself, so I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. Okay, next is informational bibliography. For this one, my favorite was probably Mary Queen of Scots. I picked this book because I'm really intrigued by British history and like medieval history and the time of like queens and kings and all of that. There was a show that came out last year called Reign, or a few years ago, that was about her, and I watched that and I loved it. So that is why I picked her bibliography. It was very good, it was very informative. I would probably recommend it for someone doing a report on her or a presentation because it does have a lot of information. Okay, the next section is literature representing diverse population. For this one, I would probably pick In the Time of the Butterflies. Um, this is a very interesting book. Again, it was based in the Dominican Republic and had to do with these four sisters that were kind of part of the rebellion against a dictator at the time, and kind of the steps that they took to try to stand up against him and what ended up happening to them. And in the end, three of them die fighting for the cause, and one of them survives. And so it was the story told from all of their perspectives, and it was a really good book, very interesting. I will probably read it again just because some of these books I kind of rushed through for the sake of having time to read them all. So I'll probably read it again to get more into it. But I think out of the three, that was my favorite here. Okay, the next section is poetry, and I think out of these three books, my favorite was Dare to Dream, Change the World. I thought it was so cool because it brought together not just like one poet and their works, but a whole bunch of different poets, and they all wrote poetry about the people that inspire them and how those people inspired them to change the world. And I thought that that was really cool, and it would be a good book for kids to read, um, because they can learn how like other people change the world, and how like if they were to change the world, they could inspire someone to make a change. Okay, the next section we'll look at is science fiction. I really liked all of these books, which was kind of strange because science fiction isn't my favorite genre, but I think the one that I liked the most was the Aliens for Breakfast. I know it's like for little kids, but I liked it because I remember when I was younger, there wasn't, at least there wasn't a lot of science fiction books that I felt like interested me. And I think this was one that, like, if I had found when I was younger, it could have interested me in the genre more. So that's why that was one of my favorites. And finally, we move on to traditional literature slash folk tales. For this one, I found a new book. I just literally looked up traditional literature and folk tales, which is Adelita, and it's the Hispanic story of Cinderella, and I really enjoyed it. I have a Hispanic background myself, and I never read a version of Cinderella in this sense. And I thought it was cool how they put like the cultural twist on it. For example, instead of losing a glass slipper, she loses a rebos, which is like a scarf that goes over your head and your shoulders. Women wore it for like modesty, and so that's what her Prince Charming uses to find her. And I thought that was kind of cool. I really enjoyed it, and think it's fun to read like the traditional fantasy folk tales retold with new cultures taken into consideration. Well, that is the end of my tour of my virtual library. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of the semester. Thanks, guys.